In the heart of the 1960s, the literary world was shaken by a creative explosion that would forever change how we understand narrative. Back then, an Argentine writer of imposing stature and a curious gaze living in Paris decided that the traditional novel was dead or, at the very least, needed to be demolished to be reborn from its ashes. That man was Julio Cortázar, and his demolition tool was a work titled Hopscotch, published in 1963. To understand the magnitude of what Cortázar attempted and achieved, we cannot simply read the book as a story of failed love in the streets of Europe. We must see it as an artifact, a laboratory for human experimentation, and a direct challenge to the reader's passivity. Cortázar did not want us to sit comfortably watching words go by. He wanted us to get our hands dirty, to jump between chapters, and to question the very nature of reality and the language we use to describe it. This is a journey through one of the most ambitious intellectual constructions of the 20th century, a labyrinth of 1,000 doors where the path is more important than the exit. The genesis of this work is found in a bohemian Paris, damp and filled with tobacco smoke, where Latin American intellectuals sought their own identity far from the dictatorships and conventions of their homelands. Julio Cortázar, who felt like a cronopio trapped in a world of farmers, was looking for a way to express the metaphysical anguish of the modern man. The historical context is vital to understanding the work. We are in the middle of the Cold War, with Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialism dominating cafe tables and Charlie Parker's jazz breaking the structures of classical music. Hopscotch is the literary equivalent of a jazz improvisation, where the main theme is recognized but constantly disintegrates and reconstructs itself through the genius of its author. Cortázar's biography is soaked into every page. His love for boxing, his fascination with cats, his mastery of several languages, and his deep rejection of rigid academic institutions. All of this converges in Hopscotch, turning it into what critics call a counter-novel. To enter the plot, we must first accept the rules of the game the author proposes in his Table of Instructions. Hopscotch can be read in two main ways. The first option is a linear reading that goes from chapter 1 to chapter 56, at which point the reader can consider the story finished. The second option, and the most revolutionary one, consists of following an order proposed by the author that jumps between chapters, integrating the so-called expendable chapters. These additional chapters are not filler, they are theoretical reflections, quotes from other authors, newspaper clippings, and fragmented thoughts that expand the novel's universe to infinity. The story begins with one of the most famous questions in world literature: would I find La Maga? This phrase introduces us to Horacio Oliveira, the protagonist, an Argentine intellectual living in Paris who spends his time searching for something he cannot define. Oliveira is a man tortured by his own excess of thought, someone who needs to analyze every feeling until it loses its freshness. In contrast, there is La Maga, Lucia, a Uruguayan woman who lives by intuition, who does not understand deep philosophy but understands life in a way that Oliveira envies and desires. The relationship between Horatio and La Maga is the engine of the first part of the book, titled From the Other Side. Both are part of the Serpent Club, a group of intellectual friends who meet to listen to jazz, drink cheap alcohol, and discuss art and metaphysics until dawn. In these meetings, time seems to stop while the group deconstructs the world. However, beneath this surface of intellectual camaraderie, a deep loneliness is hidden. Horacio does not know how to love Lucia because his intellect prevents him from doing so. He seeks an absolute union, a center that will redeem him from his fragmented existence, but his inability to let go condemns him to isolation. The climax of this Parisian stage comes with the tragic death of Rocamadour, La Maga's baby. In one of the most painful and brilliantly written scenes in Hispanic narrative, the members of the Serpent Club discuss nonsense while the child lies dead in the next room. This disconnection between human tragedy and intellectual pretension marks the end of Horatio's stay in Paris and the disappearance of La Maga. The disappearance of La Maga is not just a narrative event, it is an existential loss that pushes Oliveira back to his native Buenos Aires, starting the second part titled From This Side. Here, the atmosphere changes. The misty Paris is replaced by a more tangible but equally unsettling Buenos Aires. Horacio reunites with his childhood friend Traveler, whose name is ironic for someone who has never traveled, and Traveler's wife Talita. The dynamic established between these three characters is a distorted mirror of what was experienced in Paris. Oliveira projects the image of La Maga onto Talita, creating unbearable tension. Traveler represents what Oliveira could have been, a man with roots and a stable life, while Oliveira is the eternal seeker, the stranger in his own land. Madness begins to seep into daily reality, culminating in surreal scenes like building a bridge made of planks between two neighboring building windows to pass some mate tea, or the protagonist's work in a psychiatric hospital. This inevitably leads us to another crucial aspect, which is the deep deconstruction of the work. To fully understand Hopscotch, we must look toward the figure of Morelli, a character who functions as Cortázar's theoretical alter ego within the book. Morelli is an elderly writer who appears briefly but whose notes permeate the entire reading. Through him, Cortázar exposes his theory of the novel. Morelli proposes destroying the traditional literary forms that have turned the reader into a passive being, into what he calls a female reader, a term that is controversial today, but at the time was meant to describe someone who only wants a chewed-up, easy-to-digest story. Instead, Cortázar demands a male reader, an accomplice reader who gets involved in the creation of the work. The structure of Hopscotch is, in itself, a critique of the causality and logical order that prevailed in the 19th century novel. Life is not a straight line with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Life is a web of coincidences, of random moments, and of fragments that we try to piece together to give it meaning. The symbolism in Hopscotch is so vast it would require an entire lifetime of study. The title itself refers to the children's game of hopscotch, where one tries to get from the ground to heaven by pushing a stone with one foot. This game is a perfect metaphor for Oliveira's search. Heaven represents that state of enlightenment, of unity, of absolute truth that the protagonist pursues. But just like in the game, the path is difficult, full of forbidden squares, and a precarious balance is required not to fall. The hopscotch is a mandala, a sacred symbol representing the cosmos and the path toward the center of being. Oliveira desperately seeks that center, but every time he thinks he is close, reality fragments again. This search is not only spiritual, it is also linguistic. Cortázar felt that language was exhausted, that words had become empty labels that no longer serve to name what really matters. That is why he invents Gliglico in the famous chapter 68, an erotic and musical language that dispenses with the meaning of words to focus on their sound and the emotion they evoke. But to understand this deeply, we must look toward the connection between the character's psychology and the philosophy of the era. Horacio Oliveira suffers from what we might call hyper-consciousness. His mind is an engine that never turns off and destroys the beauty of the spontaneous. He is the alienated man of modernity, someone who feels out of place anywhere. This alienation is a central theme in existentialism, where the human being finds themselves thrown into a world without a predefined purpose and must create their own meaning. However, Oliveira fails to create that meaning because he is trapped in constant doubt. His contempt for the sentimental and his refuge in the intellectual turn him into a tragic character. On the other hand, La Maga represents otherness, the irrational, that which flows without asking permission. She is capable of finding beauty in an old thread or a piece of paper, while Horatio needs an aesthetic treatise to justify his admiration. The tension between these two poles, reason and intuition, is what gives the novel its human depth. Deconstruction also extends to the use of space and time. Paris and Buenos Aires are not just geographical settings, they are mental states. Paris is the space of experimentation, of creative disorder, of the outward search. Buenos Aires is the space of return, of confronting roots, of inner madness. Time in Hopscotch is not chronological. Through the jumps between chapters, Cortázar breaks the tyranny of the clock. A chapter from the expendable part can transport us years back or lead us to a philosophical reflection that suspends the time of the dramatic action. This montage technique is very similar to that used in cinema or avant-garde music. Each chapter is a puzzle piece that the reader must assemble, but with the peculiarity that there is no single correct way to join the pieces. There are as many versions of Hopscotch as there are readers in the world. This notion of multiplicity allows us to explore the concept of pataphysics, the science of imaginary solutions frequently mentioned in the book. Pataphysics invites us to see the world from a different logic where the absurd has its own coherence. Oliveira and his friends play at being pataphysicians, challenging the laws of social physics and conventional logic. This game is not an escape from reality, but an attempt to reach a truer reality, one that hides behind appearances and the bourgeois conventions that Cortázar so detested. The social critique in Hopscotch is subtle but constant. It manifests in the characters' refusal to lead productive and stable lives, in their preference for bohemian poverty, and in their questioning of Western values that led to the great catastrophes of the 20th century. The relevance of Hopscotch in our contemporary era is astonishing and often underestimated. If we analyze the structure of the work from a modern perspective, we realize that Cortázar visionarily anticipated what we know today as hypertext. In a world dominated by the internet, where we jump from one link to another, from a video to an article, from a social network to a forum, our way of consuming information is intrinsically non-linear. Hopscotch was the first great experiment in analog navigation. Cortázar gave us the algorithm to jump between information nodes long before the World Wide Web was invented. This connection with current technology goes beyond structure. The sense of fragmentation Oliveira experiences is very similar to what a modern user feels, bombarded by constant stimuli, yet often feeling empty and disconnected from a deeper truth. From a neuroscience perspective, reading Hopscotch proposes a fascinating exercise in neuroplasticity. By forcing the brain to constantly reconfigure the sequence of the story and establish connections between seemingly unrelated fragments, the novel activates cognitive areas that linear reading usually leaves at rest. It is a workout for the mind that prepares us for a complex and volatile world. The work teaches us to tolerate ambiguity and to understand that truth is not something handed to us finished, but something we must actively construct. In today's pop culture, we see the legacy of Hopscotch in films with fragmented narratives like Pulp Fiction or Memento, and in open-world video games where the player decides their own path and the order of events. Cortázar planted the seed of a narrative freedom that has flourished across multiple media platforms. Furthermore, modern mental health issues and the search for identity find a powerful echo in the pages of this book. Oliveira is a precursor to the contemporary man suffering from anxiety due to information overload and the lack of a solid purpose. His loneliness in the middle of a group of friends is the loneliness of the individual in the age of global communications. Oliveira's search for the kibbutz, that place of harmony and perfect coexistence, remains the same search for modern communities trying to escape the system. The enduring relevance of Hopscotch lies in the fact that it is not a static work about the past, but a living organism that continues to dialogue with our most current concerns. Oliveira's struggle to find something authentic in a world of appearances is our own daily struggle. To delve even deeper into this analysis, we must consider the influence of Carl Jung's analytical psychology on the work. Horatio's search is, in essence, a process of individuation, an attempt to integrate the different parts of his psyche. La Maga acts as his anima, the representation of the feminine and the irrational that he needs to integrate to achieve wholeness. The journey back to Buenos Aires and the encounter with Traveler, who functions as his shadow or double, is the final confrontation with his own identity. The scene in the asylum, where the boundaries between sanity and madness vanish, is the descent into the underworld necessary for any spiritual transformation. Cortázar did not just write a novel, he created a modern myth about the search for totality in a broken world. The importance of music, specifically jazz, in the construction of Hopscotch deserves detailed mention. Jazz is not just a thematic ornament, it is the organizing principle of the text. Cortázar structures his paragraphs with the rhythm of a syncopation, leaving room for improvisation within a general structure. Just as a jazz musician takes a standard melody and transforms it through their personal interpretation, Cortázar takes the standard form of the novel and stretches it, breaks it, and recomposes it. Listening to Louis Armstrong or Duke Ellington while reading Hopscotch is not just an atmospheric suggestion, it is a key to understanding the cadence of Cortázar's prose. The author believed that jazz was the only music that allowed absolute freedom of the spirit, and that same freedom is what he wanted to breathe into his words. This inevitably leads us to another crucial aspect, which is the impact of Hopscotch on the Spanish language. Before Cortázar, Spanish prose tended to be more rigid, more tied to classical and academic forms. Cortázar introduced a looseness, a use of colloquial language mixed with extreme erudition that opened doors for many other writers of the Latin American boom like Gabriel Garcia Marquez or Mario Vargas Llosa. His ability to invent words, play with punctuation, and create surreal images with crystalline clarity revolutionized the language. Hopscotch is a celebration of language, a reminder that words are toys and tools at the same time, and that we should not be afraid to break them to see what is inside. But to understand this fully, we must look toward the end of the work, which is as enigmatic as its beginning. In the final sequence of the reading proposed by the author, we find ourselves caught in an infinite loop between chapters 131 and 58. It is an open ending that reflects the impossibility of reaching a definitive conclusion in human life. Oliveira finds himself at the window of the psychiatric hospital, looking down at a hopscotch drawn in the courtyard, debating between the final jump into the void or remaining in a world he does not understand. This ending is not a defeat. It is the recognition that the search is the destination itself. Uncertainty is not something to be resolved, but something to be lived. Cortázar leaves us there in the air, in that moment of suspension before touching the ground, inviting us to decide for ourselves what it means to be free. The greatness of Hopscotch lies in its ability to remain a young book, a book that challenges each new generation of readers not to settle for given answers. It is a map of the human condition with all its contradictions, its baseness, and its moments of sublime beauty. Upon closing the book, or deciding to stop jumping between its chapters, we are not the same as when we started. Cortázar has achieved his goal. He has turned us into accomplices in his great game. He has reminded us that literature is not a museum object, but a battlefield where we fight for the meaning of our existence. Hopscotch is ultimately an act of love toward life and toward the infinite possibilities that open before us if we dare to jump. Reflecting on this entire journey, we realize that Hopscotch is not just a literary work. It is a transformative experience that challenges the borders between art and life. Julio Cortázar did not offer us a finished story, but a constantly expanding universe where every word is an invitation to wonder. Through Horacio Oliveira and his eternal search for La Maga, we have faced our own loneliness, our intellectual ambitions, and our basic need for human connection. We have navigated through bohemian Paris and melancholy Buenos Aires, understanding that those places are, in reality, corners of our own soul. The revolutionary structure of the book, its innovative language, and its philosophical depth place it as a fundamental pillar of universal culture, reminding us that there is always a different way to look at the world if we have the courage to change our perspective. Cortázar's legacy invites us to be active readers, not just of books, but of our own reality. He urges us to question imposed structures, to play with language, and to always seek that center, that kibbutz, that square of heaven in the hopscotch, even knowing the path is full of stumbles. The current relevance of this work proves that humanity's great themes, such as love, alienation, art, and the search for meaning, do not have an expiration date. Hopscotch remains alive because we, the readers, keep jumping between its pages, giving it new meanings and finding in its words an echo of our own hopes and fears. It is a book that embraces us in our imperfection and encourages us to keep searching, to keep asking, to keep living with the intensity of a jazz solo on an eternal night. At this point, the journey through Cortázar's universe reaches its momentary destination, but the true reading begins now, in the silence that follows these words. Hopscotch never ends because its message is infinite. As narrative experts would say, a masterpiece is one that continues to generate questions long after it has been closed. Cortázar has given us a compass to navigate chaos, a board to play against destiny, and a friendly voice whispering that despite everything, the jump is worth trying. Thank you for joining me in this deep and detailed analysis of one of the peaks of human creation. I hope this exploration has ignited in you the curiosity to return to those pages or to discover them for the first time with fresh eyes. Until our paths cross again in the next literary adventure,